The city's cold grip never loosened. It crept through the cracks of the sidewalk, seeping into the bones of the homeless who called the streets their home. Lucia, bundled in layers of worn-out clothing, lay curled up in the makeshift shelter she shared with Mr. Antônio. It wasn't much, just a stack of old cardboard and torn newspapers. But it was theirs, and that was all that mattered. She awoke to the sound of the wind howling through the gaps in the walls of their refuge. Her eyes fluttered open, adjusting to the dim light of the morning. The city had begun to stir around them, but in their little corner, time moved slower. The street was still, as if it too was waiting for something. Beside her, Mr. Antônio sat up slowly, his frail body creaking like an old chair. His hair, once dark and full, was now white, tangled, and unkempt. His face, marked by years of hardship, was a map of regrets and forgotten dreams. But his eyes still carried a flicker of life. Lucia watched him for a moment, feeling a pang of concern. He had been coughing a lot lately, a raspy, painful sound that never seemed to go away. She had noticed his weariness, how his steps had become slower, his breathing heavier. But he never complained, never showed weakness. He had been her protector ever since she could remember, taking care of her as if she were his own daughter. "Good morning, Mr. Antônio," she whispered, sitting up and brushing a lock of her hair out of her face. He smiled weakly, his voice hoarse. "Good morning, Minha querida," he replied, using the tender nickname he always called her. "Did you sleep well?" She nodded, though sleep had been a luxury she couldn't afford. The cold had kept her awake most of the night, and the hunger gnawed at her stomach like a constant companion. But she never let it show. She couldn't, not when he was so much worse off. Lucia helped him to his feet, steadying him as he wobbled slightly. His legs had grown weaker with time, and he relied on her more than he'd ever admit. They had no family, no home, no future, just each other. And that, in some way, felt like enough. The street outside was waking up now. The noise of people hustling to their jobs, the honking of cars, the chatter of vendors selling their goods, it all blended into the background for Lucia. She was used to it. She didn't pay attention to the people who passed by, too busy to notice the two homeless souls hidden in the shadows of the alley. But today was different. As Lucia and Mr. Antônio walked down the familiar route, a man in a sharp suit approached them. His presence cut through the noise of the street, and Lucia noticed that he was staring directly at Mr. Antônio. There was something about the way the man's eyes narrowed, as if he recognized something hidden behind the old man's weathered exterior. "Mr. Antônio," the man's voice was tentative, unsure. Mr. Antônio stopped in his tracks, looking up at the man with a confused expression. "Yes?" he asked, his voice faint, as though the words themselves were foreign to him. The man's face shifted from disbelief to something close to shock. You're still alive?" Lucia looked between the two, puzzled. Who was this man? Why did he seem so shocked to see Mr. Antônio? "Alive," Mr. Antônio echoed, his brow furrowing. "What do you mean? Who are you?" The man swallowed, a nervous laugh escaping his lips. I used to work for you, Mr. Antônio. I was your lawyer, your company, your empire. Everything. You were a wealthy man, a millionaire even. I never imagined I'd see you like this." Lucia's heart skipped a beat. "Millionaire?" Her eyes flicked to Mr. Antônio, who looked utterly bewildered. This couldn't be true. The man who cared for her, who shared his last bit of bread with her, had once been wealthy. She couldn't comprehend it. The man continued, his tone softer now, almost pitying. "You don't remember, do you? The mansion, the businesses, the fortune. It all slipped away after the fall. Your company went bankrupt. You lost everything, Mr. Antônio." Lucia watched the old man, his face unreadable. He didn't respond immediately, but his eyes seemed to wander as if lost in a memory, one that he couldn't quite reach. His fingers tightened around the edge of his coat, a sign of discomfort. "I don't know what you're talking about," Mr. Antônio whispered, his voice trembling. The man sighed, pulling something from his coat pocket. He handed over a small envelope, a crisp, expensive-looking paper that seemed out of place in Mr. Antônio's weathered hands. "This is the last bit of what's left. It's not much, but it's yours." The envelope felt heavy in Lucia's hands as she watched the man walk away, his figure disappearing into the crowd. The street noise returned, as if nothing had happened, but Lucia's mind was racing. What had just occurred? What was the truth about Mr. Antônio? And why did the man say he had once been so powerful? She turned to him, her heart pounding. Mr. Antônio, what was that all about? What happened to you? But Mr. Antônio just stood there, staring at the envelope in his hand. He didn't answer. Instead, he sank to his knees, as though the weight of the past had finally caught up with. Lucia knelt beside him, her small hand reaching out to steady him. I don't remember, he muttered again, his voice barely a whisper. I don't remember any of that. Lucia didn't know what to say. The man she had always known, the man who had been her protector, seemed to have lost something much more precious than money. He had lost a part of himself. And now, with that envelope in her hands, Lucia didn't know what future awaited them, or what kind of treasure had been buried in Mr. Antônio's past. But she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't going to leave him alone. No matter who he had been or what had happened, she would stand by his side. Together, they would face whatever came next. The weight of the envelope still lingered in Lucia's hands, though she didn't fully understand its significance. As she and Mr. Antônio made their way to their usual spot under the bridge, the questions in her mind swirled like a storm. The old man had been a millionaire? How could that be? She had never seen him wear anything more than ragged clothes and battered shoes, never heard him mention anything about a mansion or businesses. Mr. Antônio, Lucia asked hesitantly, breaking the silence. What was that man talking about? Was it really true? Were you once rich? The old man shuffled slowly, his eyes focused on the ground ahead. He didn't answer at first, and for a moment, Lucia thought he might not say anything at all. But then, his voice broke the quiet, soft and distant, as though speaking about someone else. I was, he said, his voice faint, almost as if the words pained him. I was rich once. I had everything, a beautiful house, businesses, power. But that was a long time ago, before everything fell apart. Lucia's heart tightened. She couldn't imagine Mr. Antônio in a world like that, where money and power ruled. She had always known him as someone who struggled for every meal, someone who had to fight to survive each day on the streets. What happened? She asked, her voice trembling with curiosity and concern. Why aren't you? Why aren't we still living that way? Mr. Antônio stopped walking and sighed deeply, leaning heavily on his cane. The weight of his memories seemed to press down on him, and Lucia could see the sorrow etched into his face. He closed his eyes for a moment, as though gathering the strength to relive the past. It's a long story, Lucia, he began, his voice barely more than a whisper. A story I wish I could forget. I had everything, but I was foolish. I trusted the wrong people. I made bad decisions, and in the end, I lost it all. I lost everything. Lucia stayed silent, waiting for him to continue. She had never seen Mr. Antônio like this, vulnerable, broken. For the first time, she saw the man as more than just her protector. She saw a person who had once lived a life full of dreams and ambition, only to have it all torn away. Money isn't everything, Lucia, Mr. Antônio said, his voice thick with regret. It can make you feel like you're on top of the world, but it can also destroy you. I thought I had everything under control, but when the business went under, when the company collapsed, I was left with nothing. No friends, no family, just me, alone in the world. And I ended up here, on the streets, forgotten. Lucia didn't know what to say. She had never understood the concept of wealth in the way the old man spoke of it. For her, survival was the goal, finding food, staying safe, keeping warm. But she could see now that it hadn't always been this way for him. He had once lived a life she could never imagine. Why didn't you tell me any of this before? She finally asked. Why didn't you say anything about your past? Mr. Antônio looked down at her, a sad smile tugging at the corners of his lips. I didn't want you to see me as something I'm not. I didn't want you to think that this life we have now is any different from the one I gave up. I didn't want you to know the truth about my mistakes, about how I failed. But you didn't fail, Mr. Antônio, Lucia said, her voice firm. You didn't fail me. You've always been there for me. And that's all that matters. The old man looked at her for a long moment, his eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and sorrow. He reached out slowly, placing a hand on her head, his fingers brushing through her hair. "You're a good girl, Lucia. You've always been my light in the dark." Lucia smiled softly, but the words he had spoken lingered in her mind. His fall from grace, his loss of everything he had once held dear, it was a harsh reminder of how fragile life could be. And yet, despite everything, despite losing his fortune, he had never lost his heart. He had never lost his ability to care, to love. "What will we do now?" Lucia asked after a moment, uncertainty creeping into her voice. Mr. Antônio hesitated, looking down at the envelope in his hand. It was a small thing, but it felt like the weight of a lifetime. "I don't know, Lucia, but we can't keep living like this. I don't want to keep you stuck in this life, with nothing." Lucia felt a spark of hope flicker inside her chest. The thought of escaping the streets, of finding a better life, made her heart race. Could they really leave? Could they rebuild from the ashes of what was lost? Before she could voice her thoughts, Mr. Antônio gently tucked the envelope into his coat pocket, his eyes focused on the horizon. "We'll figure it out," he said softly, more to himself than to her. "I promise." The day passed slowly, with the two of them doing what they always did, begging for food, trying to survive. But the idea of something more, of a life beyond the street, began to take root in Lucia's mind. There had to be a way out. There had to be a chance for them to rebuild. That night, as they lay in their cardboard shelter, Lucia stared up at the sky through the cracks in the cardboard. The stars flickered faintly, like distant hopes. Her heart swelled with the possibility of a future she had never dared to imagine. Tomorrow, she thought, they would start a new journey. Together. The sun had barely risen when Lucia and Mr. Antônio woke up the next morning. The city had already started to buzz with its usual hustle and bustle, people rushing to work, cars honking, the streets alive with the energy of another day. But for the two of them, it felt like a new beginning. The night had passed quietly, but the promise of something more lingered in the air, like a silent promise. Lucia looked at Mr. Antônio, who was already sitting up, his wrinkled hands resting on his knees. His eyes were tired, but there was a flicker of something new, their determination. She had seen it before, a glimmer of hope, but today it felt different. Today it felt real. "Mr. Antônio," Lucia said softly, her voice full of uncertainty. "What do we do now? How do we start over?" He looked at her, a deep sigh escaping his lips as he adjusted his coat. The envelope from the previous day had been tucked away safely in his pocket, but it weighed heavily on his mind. He had spent the night thinking about it, thinking about his past and about what he could do for her, for both of them. "First, we need to find out what's in that envelope," Mr. Antônio said, his voice calm but firm. "I don't know if there's much left, but it might be a start. We can't live on the streets forever." Lucia nodded, the excitement and fear swirling inside her. She had always known survival, always known what it meant to struggle for every meal. But the thought of something more, of a real chance to build a future, was both thrilling and terrifying. "Do you think it's enough to change our lives?" she asked. "I don't know," Mr. Antônio replied, shaking his head. "But it's a chance. And sometimes that's all we need. A chance to rebuild, to make something of what we have left." They stood up together, the weight of their journey ahead settling on their shoulders. For Lucia, this was more than just a decision to leave the streets. It was the beginning of a path they would walk together, one where they would face the unknown side by side. She wasn't alone in this fight, and that thought brought a sense of comfort to her heart. They made their way to a small, dingy cafe on the corner of the street. It wasn't much, but it was quiet. They sat down at a small table near the window, and Mr. Antônio pulled the envelope from his coat pocket. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it, revealing a single piece of paper, yellowed and worn with age. Lucia leaned forward, watching him closely as he read the paper in silence. She couldn't see what it said, but she could see the change in his face, the way his eyes widened, the way his lips pressed together in disbelief. "What is it, Mr. Antônio?" Lucia asked, her voice barely a whisper. He looked up from the paper, his face pale. For a moment, he said nothing. He just stared at the paper in his hand as if he couldn't believe what he was reading. "It's an old deed," he said finally, his voice low. "A deed to a piece of property. My property." Lucia felt a shiver run down her spine. Property? What did that mean? "Where is it?" she asked her. Curiosity piqued. Mr. Antônio took a deep breath. "It's a small house out on the edge of the city. I forgot about it. I thought I had lost everything, but this house, it's still mine. It's all that's left of what I once had. Lucia couldn't believe what she was hearing. A house? After everything they had been through, after all the years of living on the streets, could it really be possible that they had a home waiting for them? You mean we could live there? We could have a real home? Lucia's voice trembled with hope. Mr. Antônio nodded slowly, his face a mixture of disbelief and quiet joy. It's a long shot, Lucia. The house is old, and it might not be much, but it's ours. And it's the only thing we have left. The thought of leaving the streets, of having a place to call their own, filled Lucia with a sense of possibility she had never felt before. For so long, she had believed that the streets were all she would ever know, that survival was all that mattered. But now, with this piece of paper in hand, it felt as though the world had opened up to her. We have to go see it, Lucia said, her eyes wide with excitement. We have to try. Mr. Antônio looked at her, a soft smile tugging at his lips. You're right, we'll go today. It's time we took a chance. And so, with nothing but the envelope and the clothes on their backs, they set out for the edge of the city. The journey was long, and the city around them grew quieter and more desolate as they moved, farther away from the familiar streets. The world seemed to change as they walked, as if each step was taking them further away from the life they had known. When they finally reached the house, it wasn't at all what Lucia had imagined. The house was small, crumbling, and neglected. Its walls were cracked, and the yard was overgrown with weeds. But as Lucia stood there, looking at it, she didn't see the decay. She saw the possibility, the chance to create something new, to rebuild from the ruins. This is it, Mr. Antônio said, his voice filled with both awe and sadness. Lucia smiled, her heart full of determination. It doesn't matter what it looks like, it's ours, and we're going to make it work. The old man stood beside her, his eyes gazing at the house with a quiet acceptance. For the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to hope. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. And together, they would build a new life one step at a time. The old house stood before them, weathered by time, but full of potential. Lucia could see it now, not as the crumbling building it appeared to be, but as a blank canvas waiting to be filled with warmth, laughter, and life. The weeds in the yard were a small obstacle. The cracked windows were only minor imperfections. What mattered was that this was their chance, their second chance. Mr. Antônio stood beside her, his eyes scanning the house. His hands, once so powerful and capable, trembled as he placed them on the gate. He hesitated, but Lucia could sense the stirring of hope within him. He had been beaten down by life, but now, standing before this little house, it was as if a spark had been lit inside him again. A spark of possibility. This is really it, huh? Lucia said quietly, her voice filled with awe. It's ours, Mr. Antônio replied, the words still sounding strange on his tongue. It's all we have left. They walked together to the front door, and with a creak, the door opened, revealing the dim interior of the house. Dust filled the air, and cobwebs clung to the corners. The smell of mildew was thick, but Lucia didn't care. She stepped inside, feeling the floorboards beneath her feet. The house was empty, save for the remnants of a forgotten past, old furniture, discarded belongings, and broken windows. But to Lucia, it felt like a new beginning. This house could be transformed. They could make it theirs. It would take time, hard work, and maybe even more than a little patience. But they had nothing but time. Where do we start? She asked, her excitement bubbling over. Mr. Antônio looked around, his face softening with a mixture of disbelief and gratitude. First, we clear the debris. Then we'll see what we can salvage. For the rest of the day, they worked in silence, clearing out old furniture, sweeping dust from the corners, and trying to make the place livable. It was hard work, harder than anything Lucia had done before. But it was a work of hope, and each sweep of the broom, each piece of broken furniture they moved, felt like a step forward, a step away from the streets. By evening, the house looked a little more like a home. The dirt had been swept away, and they had managed to set up a small corner with blankets and pillows where they could sleep. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. As they sat together that night, exhausted from their labor. Lucia looked at Mr. Antônio. He was sitting by the small fire they had made from an old tin can, his eyes reflecting the flames. He had told her stories over the years, stories of his lost empire, of how everything had crumbled. But tonight, he seemed at peace in a way he hadn't been in a long time. "I never thought I'd see this again," he said quietly, his voice filled with emotion. "A home, a place to call our own." Lucia smiled softly, leaning her head on his shoulder. "I never thought we'd have one either. But now we do." Mr. Antônio chuckled, his voice weak, but filled with affection. "We have each other. That's all we really need, Lucia. Everything else can be rebuilt." For the first time, Lucia didn't feel the weight of their struggles. The house wasn't perfect, and they still had a long way to go before it felt truly like a home. But as she sat there beside Mr. Antônio, she knew one thing for sure: they were no longer lost. They had found something, even in the midst of all the brokenness. They had found hope. The following days were filled with hard work fixing the windows, patching up holes in the walls, and gathering whatever supplies they could find. They used the little money they had to buy basic necessities: food, cleaning supplies, and small tools. It wasn't glamorous, and it wasn't easy, but every small improvement felt like a victory. As the days turned into weeks, the house slowly transformed. It wasn't grand, but it was warm. The walls, once cracked and dusty, were now painted a soft shade of yellow that brightened up the rooms. The small yard out front was cleaned up, and though the weeds still grew, they had planted flowers in small pots, a small symbol of new life. But it wasn't just the house that was changing. Lucia and Mr. Antônio were changing too. They were learning to live again, to trust in the future. It wasn't easy, and there were days when they both felt discouraged, when the weight of their past seemed too heavy to bear. But every morning, they woke up and started again, side by side. One afternoon, as they worked in the garden, a knock at the door broke the silence. Mr. Antônio wiped the sweat from his brow and walked inside, opening the door cautiously. Lucia stood at the threshold, watching as a tall man in a uniform stepped inside. "Can I help you?" Mr. Antônio asked, his voice wary. The man smiled, holding up a clipboard. "I'm here to check on the property," he said. "There was a report about some abandoned homes in the area, and we need to confirm ownership." Lucia's stomach tightened. For a moment, she feared they might lose everything. Again, that this was some kind of trap. But Mr. Antônio remained calm, standing tall despite the uncertainty. "This house is ours," he said firmly. "We have the deed." The man glanced at the clipboard, checking the information before nodding. "Well, it seems everything is in order. Just wanted to make sure you had proper documentation." Relief washed over both of them. "Thank you," Mr. Antônio said, his voice softer now. "We're just getting started here." The man smiled again. "Take care of it," he said, and with that, he left. As Mr. Antônio closed the door, he looked over at Lucia, a smile breaking through his tired face. "It's ours, Lucia. No one can take it away." Lucia's heart swelled with pride. She had never felt so secure in her life. They had a home, and no matter how hard it got, she knew they would fight for it. As the sun set that evening, Lucia sat on the porch, looking out at the small yard they had worked so hard to cultivate. The future was still uncertain, and there were many challenges ahead. But for the first time in years, she felt a sense of peace. They were not just surviving anymore, they were living. And no matter what happened, Lucia knew they would face it together, side by side. The days turned into weeks, and life in the little house began to take on a rhythm. Despite their hard work, there were moments when Lucia could still feel the weight of the streets pulling at her. She hadn't realized how much of herself had been shaped by the harshness of the world they had lived in, how survival had become second nature to her. But here, in this house, things were different. She could sleep without the constant fear of being woken up by a harsh voice or the sound of footsteps coming too close. Yet, the quiet was sometimes just as unsettling as the noise of the streets. It was as if the silence left room for all the emotions that had been buried deep inside her. One chilly morning, as Lucia sat by the window, watching the mist roll through the empty street, she couldn't help but feel a nagging emptiness. She turned to Mr. Antônio, who was busy at the table, trying to figure out how to fix a broken lamp. His back was hunched, his movement slow, The old man was starting to show his age more than ever, and she could see how tired he was, how worn out by the past few weeks of hard work. "Mr. Antônio," Lucia said, her voice softer than usual, "do you ever miss the life you had before? Do you ever wish things had turned out differently?" He paused, looking up from the lamp, his eyes clouded with thoughts that seemed far away. He didn't answer right away, and Lucia wondered if she had crossed a line by asking. But then, after what felt like a long time, he spoke. "I miss parts of it," he said quietly. "I miss the freedom, the power, the feeling of having control over my life. But the things I had, the wealth, the company, they didn't bring me peace. They didn't bring me what I needed." He paused, and for the first time, Lucia saw a tear slip down his cheek. "I lost my family in the process. And what use is all that wealth if you're alone in the end?" Lucia's heart tightened. She had never asked about his past in such a direct way before. He had always been so strong, so unshakable in her eyes. But now, as he spoke of his regrets, she saw the cracks in his armor. He was just as broken as she was, even if he had once had everything. I think I'm scared sometimes," Lucia confessed, looking down at her hands. "I'm scared that we're not enough, that we'll end up back on the streets again, that I'll end up alone like I was before. I don't want that." "Mr. Antônio," the old man stood up slowly, walking over to where she sat. He placed a hand on her shoulder, the warmth of his touch a stark contrast to the coldness in the room. "Lucia, we've been through so much," he said softly. "The streets, the cold, the hunger, but none of that is who we are. What we have now, this house, it's just the beginning. It's not perfect, but it's ours. And you know something? As long as we're together, we'll never be alone." Lucia felt a lump form in her throat. She had always been strong, or at least she tried to be. She had learned early that the world didn't care about her, that survival meant pushing aside emotions, pushing aside fears. But here, in this house, with Mr. Antônio by her side, it was different. She realized that maybe it was okay to be afraid sometimes, as long as they kept moving forward. They spent the rest of the day working around the house, fixing what they could, making improvements where they could. But there was a quiet unease between them, a shared understanding that things weren't as easy as they seemed. Despite their determination, there was a part of them both that wondered how long it would last. That evening, as they sat on the porch, a figure appeared at the end of the street. Lucia squinted into the growing darkness, trying to make out who it was. The figure moved closer, and she felt her heart skip a beat. It was a young boy, no older than 12, dirty and gaunt, his clothes torn. He looked lost, like he had been wandering for days. "Who is that?" Lucia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Antônio glanced over at the boy, his face hardening slightly. "I don't know," he said, "but we can't ignore him. He needs help." Lucia felt a strange mix of emotions. The boy reminded her of herself, of the days when she had been alone, when she had been lost on the streets. She wanted to help him, to offer him the warmth and safety that Mr. Antônio had given her, but she also feared what it might mean for their own fragile existence. Could they afford to help someone else when they still struggled with their own survival? The boy approached cautiously, his eyes darting around nervously. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked from hunger. "Excuse me," he said, looking at them with desperation. "Can you help me? I've been on the streets for days. I'm hungry. I don't have anywhere to go." Lucia's heart broke for him. She looked at Mr. Antônio, who had already begun to rise, his expression unreadable. He walked over to the boy, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Come inside," Mr. Antônio said gently. "We'll give you something to eat." The boy's face lit up with relief. Thank you so much." As they led the boy inside, Lucia couldn't help but wonder what the future held for them. They had barely enough for themselves, and now they had a new mouth to feed. But she knew, deep down, that they couldn't turn him away. She and Mr. Antônio had been given a second chance at life, and now they had the opportunity to offer that same chance to someone else. That night, as they shared a small meal with the boy, Lucia looked around their little house. It was modest, small, and far from perfect. But for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel the cold emptiness she had carried inside her for so long. There was warmth here, real warmth, the kind that came from people who cared for one another. And in that moment, Lucia realized something important. It wasn't the wealth, the status, or the power that made a person rich. It was love. It was kindness. It was sharing what little you had with someone else. They might not have much, but they had each other. And for Lucia, that was more than enough. The days after the boy's arrival were both challenging and heartwarming. His name was Gabriel, and he had a quiet, almost withdrawn presence about him. At first, he didn't speak much, simply eating the small meals Mr. Antônio and Lucia provided and sleeping on the floor by the fire. But as time passed, Lucia began to see glimpses of his story in his eyes that seemed to carry a sadness far beyond his years. She learned that Gabriel had been living on the streets for almost as long as she had. His parents had passed away when he was just a small child, and he had been forced to survive alone ever since. Like Lucia, Gabriel had never known the comfort of a stable home. His memories were scattered, fragmented, like pieces of a broken puzzle that couldn't quite fit together. At night, when the house was still and quiet, Lucia often heard him crying softly to himself. It broke her heart, but she didn't know how to help him. She had never been taught how to heal such deep wounds, not even her own. She could only offer the comfort she had known: food, shelter, and the quiet reassurance that they were all in this together. Mr. Antônio, too, had become attached to Gabriel. He saw the same pain in the boy that he had once seen in himself, an ache that couldn't be soothed by food or shelter alone. But he had no words of wisdom to offer Gabriel, no magic solution to ease the boy's suffering. The old man simply treated him with the same care and patience he had always shown Lucia, never pushing him, never questioning him, but always being there. One evening, as they sat together in the small living room, the air thick with the smell of soup simmering on the stove, Gabriel finally spoke. His voice was low, hesitant, as though the words had been trapped inside him for far too long. "I never had anyone," he said, his eyes fixed on the floor. "I don't know what it's like to have a family, to have people who love you. I don't know how to be loved." Lucia, who had been sitting silently beside Mr. Antônio, felt a pang of recognition in her chest. She had been there. She had felt the same emptiness, the same hunger, not just for food, but for something more. A place in the world, a place where she mattered. "Gabriel," she began softly, "we're not perfect. We don't have much, but we have each other. And that's something. You don't have to be alone anymore." Her words were simple, but they were the truth. She had learned over time that being together, no matter how little you had, was what mattered most. It was what made a family. Not blood, not wealth, but shared moments, shared pain, and shared dream. Gabriel looked up, his dark eyes meeting hers for the first time with something resembling trust. I think I can learn that," he whispered. Mr. Antônio, who had been quietly listening, nodded slowly. "It's not easy, Gabriel, but sometimes the hardest part is just letting yourself believe that you deserve to be loved. You've got us now, and we'll help you. You don't have to carry your pain alone." The next few weeks were filled with small victories. Gabriel began to open up more, sharing stories of his life on the streets, his fears, and his hopes. There were days when he still seemed withdrawn, lost in the weight of his past. But there were also days when he would laugh, when he would sit at the table and joke with Lucia and Mr. Antônio, or when he would help with the gardening outside, carefully tending to the small patch of vegetables they had started to grow. Lucia felt a shift in herself too. Having Gabriel in their lives reminded her of her own journey, the loneliness she had once felt, the fear of trusting others, of believing that anyone could care for her. But now, as they worked together, as they shared meals and stories and even silences, she began to see the house not just as a place of shelter, but as a place of healing. One evening, as the three of them sat by the fire, a sense of peace settled over the house. It was not the kind of peace that came with the absence of struggle, but the kind that came from knowing that, no matter what, they had each other. They had made it through the hardest part, the part where they had to choose to care for one another. Despite everything, "I never thought I'd feel at home again," Mr. Antônio said, breaking the silence. He was looking into the fire, his voice soft and contemplative. "When I lost everything, I thought I would die on the streets, alone. But now I know that home is where the people you love are. And you too, "You're my family." Lucia smiled, her heart swelling with something she hadn't felt in a long time: belonging. She turned to Gabriel, who was sitting quietly beside her, a faint smile on his face. "You're part of our family now, Gabriel," she said, her voice steady. "You're not alone anymore." Gabriel's eyes glistened, and for the first time since he had arrived, Lucia saw something in his expression: hope, real hope. The kind that came with the belief that things could change, that the past didn't have to define who he was or what he could become. That night, as they sat together in the warmth of the fire, it was clear to all of them that the journey ahead would not be easy. There would still be struggles, still moments of doubt and fear. But for the first time, they were not walking that path alone. They had each other, and in that, they had everything they needed. The house, once empty and broken, was now full of life. The echoes of laughter, the soft conversation, the shared meals, they were the true foundation of what made a home. And with that, Lucia knew that no matter how difficult the road ahead might be, they would face it together as a family. The house had become more than just four walls. It had become a sanctuary, a place where the scars of the past began to heal, where laughter could fill the air once more, and where hope could finally breathe. Despite everything they had been through, the small family that had formed between Lucia, Mr. Antônio, and Gabriel had begun to thrive. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. It was theirs. The days felt easier now. Gabriel's quiet smile, though rare, was a testament to the small progress he was making. He still had moments when the weight of the world seemed to press down on him, but he no longer seemed lost in it. Lucia watched him with a sense of pride. She had seen herself in him, the fear of opening up, the fear of letting others in. But like her, he was learning to trust again. Mr. Antônio, too, had begun to look younger. The lines on his face, though still there, didn't seem as heavy anymore. It was as if the burden of his past had started to lift, piece by piece. Though the house was still far from perfect, it was a reflection of the love and care they had all put into it. Each new improvement, each little task they completed, felt like a triumph, a sign that they were moving forward. But life, as it always does, had a way of throwing challenges their way. One day, as Lucia was out in the garden, tending to the small vegetables they had planted, she noticed a car parked outside their house. It was an expensive car, shiny and new, completely out of place in their quiet neighborhood. Her heart skipped a beat as she wondered who it could be. It wasn't long before the door opened and a well-dressed woman stepped out. She walked toward the house with purpose, her heels clicking against the pavement. Lucia's first instinct was to turn and run inside to hide, but something stopped her. She didn't know what it was, but she knew this woman was important, and it seemed that whatever was about to happen, they couldn't avoid it. The woman reached the door and knocked firmly. Lucia stood frozen for a moment, unsure of what to do. Mr. Antônio and Gabriel were inside, but she didn't know if they were ready for whatever this woman had come to say. Still, she found herself walking to the door and opening it. "Can I help you?" Lucia asked, her voice trembling slightly, unsure of who this stranger was or what she wanted. The woman looked down at Lucia, her expression unreadable. She was tall, with sharp features and expensive-looking clothes. There was something in the way she carried herself that suggested she was used to getting what she wanted. Her eyes moved over Lucia and then past her into the house. "I'm looking for someone," the woman said, her tone businesslike. Mr. Antônio, Lucia's heart tightened. This was unexpected. She hadn't thought about the outside world in so long. Who would be looking for Mr. Antônio, and why? "Please come in," Lucia said, stepping aside to let the woman in. "He's inside." The woman stepped past her and into the house, and Lucia followed closely behind, feeling an overwhelming sense of unease. When they reached the small living room, Mr. Antônio looked up from where he was sitting, his hands still covered in the grime of working on a broken chair. "Who is it, Lucia?" he asked, his voice cautious. The woman turned to face him, her eyes narrowing as if she were sizing him up. "Mr. Antônio," she said, her voice cool. "You don't know me, but I know you. I'm Clara Alvarenga. I was your financial advisor." Mr. Antônio's face paled slightly. He stood up slowly, as if the name alone had drained all the energy from his body. "Clara," he murmured, his voice distant, as if recalling a time long gone. "What are you doing here?" After all these years, Clara's expression didn't soften. She stepped forward, her heels clicking against the floor. I came because I need you to sign something to finalize the last of the company's assets. I was sent here to make sure everything is wrapped up. Lucia could feel the tension in the room. She watched Mr. Antônio, who stood frozen, his eyes distant. She had never seen him like this before, so unsettled, so small. There was something about Clara that seemed to have brought him back to a part of himself he had long buried. "This is not who I am anymore," Mr. Antônio said, his voice wavering. "I don't want to sign anything. I don't want to go back to that life. I don't want any of it." Clara's eyes softened for a moment, as if she were looking at a man who no longer existed in the world she remembered. But her tone remained firm. "I understand, but this is about finalizing what's left of your estate, Mr. Antônio. It's legal business. I don't have a choice in this." Lucia stood quietly by the door, watching as the conversation unfolded. She didn't fully understand the weight of what was happening, but she knew this woman had come to bring a piece of the past back into their present, a past Mr. Antônio was trying to leave behind. After a long pause, Mr. Antônio sighed and slowly walked toward a small desk in the corner. He pulled out a stack of papers from a drawer and, without a word, handed them to Clara. His hand trembled as he did so. "I'll sign," he said quietly, "but you need to understand something, Clara. This house, this life, it's the only thing that matters to me now. I don't want anything else. I don't want to go back to that world." Clara took the papers and looked them over briefly. "I understand," she said after a moment, "but sometimes we can't outrun the past." Lucia didn't know what to say. The weight of the conversation, of everything she didn't understand, hung in the air like a thick fog. She watched Clara leave without another word, and once the door clicked shut behind her, the silence between the three of them felt suffocating. Lucia turned to Mr. Antônio, who was standing by the desk, his face pale and tight with emotion. "What was that about?" she asked gently, her heart aching for him. Mr. Antônio didn't answer right away. He simply stood there, staring at the papers in his hands, before finally folding them neatly and putting them back in the drawer. "Sometimes, Lucia," he said slowly, "you can't run from your past, but you can choose what you want to be in the present." He turned to her then, his tired eyes meeting hers, and for the first time, she saw the weight of everything he had been carrying. But she also saw something else resolve. "We've come too far to go back now," he said quietly. "This life we have, this family, is all that matters." Lucia nodded, her heart swelling with the same resolve. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The past couldn't define them anymore. They had built something new, something worth fighting for, and no matter what, they would protect it. The next few days felt heavy, like a storm brewing just beyond the horizon. Clara's visit had left a mark on Mr. Antônio, and Lucia could see the conflict in his eyes. There was something about that meeting, something about the papers that he had signed, that was pulling him back to a place he didn't want to go. Though he didn't speak much about it, his silence spoke volumes. Life continued in the little house. They worked together to fix what they could, and each small victory brought a sense of comfort, like patching up an old wound. The garden grew a little fuller each day, the flowers blooming brighter, the vegetables beginning to sprout. Gabriel, though still quiet, found a rhythm in helping out, his hands busy with the tasks of daily life. It was as though they had all found a new sense of normal, one that felt far removed from the chaos of their pasts. Yet, despite the progress they had made, there was an undercurrent of tension, a sense that something was not quite right. Lucia couldn't shake the feeling that their fragile peace was about to be tested. One evening, as they sat together for a simple meal of soup and bread, Mr. Antônio's eyes drifted to the window, his gaze distant. He hadn't said much all day, and the silence between them was thick with unspoken word. Lucia glanced at him, wondering if she should say something, but before she could, he spoke. "I've been thinking," he said slowly, as if weighing each word carefully, "about the past, about Clara's visit. I don't know if I can keep living like this, knowing there's unfinished business, knowing there's a world out there I've tried to forget." Lucia felt a knot form in her stomach. "What do you mean, Mr. Antônio?" Her voice was quiet, but her heart was racing. "I signed those papers because I thought it was the right thing to do. I thought it was over. But Clara, she wants to finalize everything. She wants to liquidate the last of my assets, sell off whatever is left. I didn't want any of it. But now I wonder if I'm doing the right thing by leaving it all behind. Lucia's mind raced. She didn't fully understand the world Mr. Antônio had once been a part of, but she knew that whatever he had lost, it meant a great deal to him. She could see the conflict in his eyes, the struggle between wanting to protect the life they had built and the pull of the past that still haunted him. You don't have to go back to that world, Lucia said softly, her voice full of determination. We have a life here, a life with each other. That's all that matters. You've already given up so much. You don't need to go back to that. Mr. Antônio smiled weakly, but there was a sadness in his eyes. I wish it were that simple, Lucia. You see, I thought I could just walk away. I thought I could leave it all behind and start fresh. But there are things, unfinished debts, people who still think I owe them. There's no running from that. And if I don't take care of it, if I don't finish it, then I'm afraid it might catch up with us. Lucia sat in silence, feeling the weight of his words. She had always known that the road to peace was not an easy one, but hearing Mr. Antônio speak like this, it made her realize just how fragile their happiness was. The past wasn't done with them yet, and no matter how much they tried to move forward, the shadows of that past would always linger. Gabriel, who had been sitting quietly at the table, finally spoke up. His voice, though small, carried an unexpected wisdom. Maybe you can't outrun it, but maybe you don't have to face it alone. Lucia turned to him, surprised by the words coming from the young boy. He was still healing, still learning how to trust, but his words seemed to carry the weight of everything they had all gone through. You're not alone, Mr. Antônio, Gabriel continued. We're here. You don't have to carry it all by yourself. Mr. Antônio looked at Gabriel, his tired eyes softening. I don't want to drag you into my mess, he said quietly. You've both given me so much already. I'm afraid I'll just end up bringing you down. Lucia reached out, placing her hand on his. You've already brought us up, Mr. Antônio. You showed us how to survive. You've given us more than you'll ever know. We're a family, and families stick together. We'll figure it out, whatever it is. For a long moment, there was only silence. But it was a comfortable silence, one that spoke of understanding, of trust. The past might still linger, but together, they could face whatever came next. The following days brought more tension as Mr. Antônio grew more distant. He seemed preoccupied, lost in thoughts that he couldn't express. Lucia and Gabriel continued their daily routines, but there was an unspoken understanding between them. They couldn't shield Mr. Antônio from his past, but they could be there for him as he faced it. One afternoon, a letter arrived at the door. It was from Clara Alvarenga, the financial advisor who had come to visit weeks ago. Lucia took it in her hands, the thick paper sealed with a wax stamp. She knew that whatever it was, it would bring them closer to the truth about Mr. Antônio's past. When Mr. Antônio opened the letter, his face grew pale as he read through the contents. Lucia stood beside him, her breath caught in her throat. It's not over, Mr. Antônio muttered, his voice strained. They've found more debts, more claims. I'll have to sell the house to pay for it. Lucia felt a pang of fear. The house, the only thing they had left, might be taken from them. The thought of losing it was unbearable, but she refused to let fear take control. They had fought too hard for this new life to lose it now. No, Lucia said firmly, her voice filled with resolve. We won't let them take it. We'll fight. We'll find a way. Mr. Antônio looked at her, his eyes filled with both gratitude and sorrow. I never wanted you to have to fight for this life, but I'm afraid we might not have a choice. Lucia squeezed his hand, determination burning in her chest. We've already fought, and we've already won. This house, this life, it's ours, and we'll protect it together. As the weight of the letter hung heavy in the air, Lucia realized something important. They didn't just have a house. They had each other, and together, there was nothing they couldn't face. The days that followed were filled with uncertainty. The letter from Clara had cast a shadow over their newfound peace, a reminder that the past was never truly gone. The weight of the debts, the claims against Mr. Antônio's name, threatened to unravel everything they had worked so hard to build. Lucia couldn't understand the intricacies of the business world that had once belonged to Mr. Antônio, but she knew one thing for sure: this house, their home, was the only place they truly had. It was early in the morning when Mr. Antônio finally broke the silence that had stretched over the past few days. He had spent hours pacing the floor, reading and rereading the letter, until the weight of it seemed to consume him. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low but determined. "The debts I've left behind, they're not small. And if we don't find a way to settle the house, everything will be gone." Lucia's heart skipped a beat. The thought of losing their home, of being back on the streets, was unbearable. She couldn't imagine going through that again. But there was a fire inside her now, a strength she hadn't realized she possessed until this moment. "What can we do?" she asked, her voice steady. "We can't just let them take everything. We don't have much," Mr. Antônio replied, his shoulders slumping. "But we have something that might help. There's a piece of property, an old piece of land I still own. It's not worth much, but if we sell it, we might be able to settle part of the debt. It's not a solution, but it's a start." Lucia felt a spark of hope flicker inside her. "Where is it? How can we sell it?" "It's on the outskirts of the city," Mr. Antônio explained. "It's been sitting there for years. I never thought I'd have to go back to it, but now it might be the only way." Gabriel, who had been quietly listening in the corner, stood up and walked over to where they were sitting. His face was set with determination, a new fire in his eyes. "We can do this," he said. "We can sell it, and then we can use the money to pay off the debts. It's not everything, but it's something." Lucia looked at him, amazed by his resolve. He was still so young, but there was a strength in him that she hadn't seen before. It was the strength of someone who had lived through hardship and was ready to fight for something better. "Gabriel's right," Lucia said, her voice firm. "We can make this work. We'll sell the land, and then we'll fight to keep what's ours." Mr. Antônio looked at them both, his eyes softening. He had always been the protector, the one who carried the burden for the three of them. But now he saw the strength in Lucia, and Gabriel saw that they were no longer the scared children they had once been. They were family, and together they would fight for what was theirs. "We'll go tomorrow," he said, standing up. "We'll get it done." The next morning, they set out early, the sun barely rising as they made their way to the piece of land Mr. Antônio had mentioned. It was a long journey, the road bumpy and unpaved, the city growing more distant as they ventured further into the countryside. The air was heavy with the scent of earth, and the silence between them felt different, more purposeful. When they finally reached the land, it was nothing like they had expected. Overgrown with weeds and tangled vines, the land seemed abandoned, forgotten by time. Yet, in the distance, Lucia could see the faint outline of a small, dilapidated building, a remnant of what had once been. "This is it," Mr. Antônio said, his voice heavy. "This is all that's left." Lucia walked slowly toward the building, her heart pounding. She had no idea how much the land was worth, or if it could even help them pay off the debts. But as she stood there, looking at the overgrown weeds and the building that had once meant something, she realized that this land was a part of their past. It was a part of Mr. Antônio's story, and now it was a part of hers too. Gabriel approached her, standing beside her as they looked at the land. "It's not much," he said quietly, "but it's something we can work with together." They spent the next few hours cleaning up the area, clearing away the weeds and debris that had overtaken the land. They made what little progress they could, hoping that the effort would be enough to make the property presentable. It wasn't much, but it felt like a start. By the time the sun began to set, they had gathered enough to make it look as though the land had potential. Mr. Antônio, though tired, seemed determined. He had spent so many years trying to forget this piece of his life, but now it felt like the key to their future. "We'll sell it," he said, his voice full of conviction. "This will be enough. We'll make it work." Lucia nodded, her heart swelling with a mixture of fear and hope. She had no idea what would happen next, but she knew one thing for sure: she wouldn't let them take their home. They had worked too hard for it, fought too much, and now they had something worth fighting for. That night, as they sat around their small table in the house, the silence felt different. It wasn't filled with fear, but with a quiet determination. They had made a plan. They had a way forward, and no matter what, they would face the future together. The days that followed their visit to the land were filled with mixed emotions. The sun had set on one chapter of their lives, and now, as they stood on the edge of a new one, there was both hope and fear in the air. The decision to sell the land was not an easy one. It was a piece of Mr. Antoni's past, a reminder of everything he had lost. But as the days passed, the need to secure their future, to protect the home they had fought for, overshadowed the lingering regrets. They began the process of selling the land, and though it wasn't easy, it was necessary. Every day, Mr. Antony would take care of the legal details, making calls and signing papers, while Lucia and Gabriel worked on the house. The small improvements they had made so far had made a big difference, but there was still much to be done. The roof needed repairs, the walls had to be reinforced, and the garden still had a long way to go before it would provide enough to feed them. Lucia found herself spending more time outside, tending to the garden and making sure everything was in order. Gabriel, now fully integrated into their routine, worked alongside her, quietly planting seeds and trimming the plants. He still had moments when he seemed distant, lost in his own thoughts, but he was becoming more and more a part of their little family. One evening, after a long day of work, Lucia found herself sitting on the porch, looking out at the small patch of land they had cleaned up. The sunset painted the sky with hues of orange and purple, and for a brief moment, everything felt calm. But then, a feeling of unease crept up on her again. She couldn't shake the thought that they were still at the mercy of forces beyond their control. Selling the land was a step forward, yes, but what would happen once the debts were paid? Would it be enough to keep them safe, or would something else come crashing down? Lucia, a voice called, breaking her thought. She turned to see Mr. Antony standing at the door, his face tired but resolute. "We need to talk." Her heart skipped a beat. She had known something was weighing on him, but she hadn't expected it to be this. She stood up, walking toward him. "Is everything all right?" she asked, her voice full of concern. Mr. Antony hesitated for a moment before answering. "I've made a decision," he said quietly. "The sale of the land. It's going through, but there's more to it than just that. I've been thinking about how much I've put on you both. I don't want to drag you into my past anymore. I don't want you to carry this burden for me." Lucia looked at him, confused. "What do you mean?" "I mean that I've been holding on to something for too long," he said. "The debt, it's not just financial. It's more than that. I've been running from it all my life, but it's time to face it. I'm going to do what I should have done a long time ago." Lucia's mind raced, unsure of what he was talking about. "What are you saying, Mr. Antony?" "I'm going to make things right," he said firmly. "I need to go to the people I've wronged. I need to settle what I can. I can't keep running. I won't let you both take on my mistakes. This is something I have to do on my own." The words hit Lucia like a freight train. The thought of Mr. Antony leaving, facing the people from his past, terrified her. He had already done so much for her, more than anyone ever had, and now he wanted to take on the weight of his past alone. The thought of losing him, after everything they had been through, was unbearable. "You can't do this alone," Lucia said, her voice shaking. "We're a family. We face everything together. You don't have to go back to them. We'll find another way." But Mr. Antony's face was set with determination. "I can't keep dragging you through this. The past is my responsibility. I have to make it right, even if it means walking away from this life." Lucia felt a lump form in her throat. "Mr. Antony, please don't leave us." He turned to her, his eyes softening. "I'm not leaving you, Lucia. I'll always be here, but you need to understand. I've lived my whole life trying to avoid the consequences of my actions. I can't do that anymore. I've got to face the people I've hurt, the people I've betrayed. Only then can I truly be free." Tears welled up in Lucia's eyes, but she held them back. She didn't want him to see how scared she was. But the truth was, the thought of losing him was too much to bear. He had been her protector, her guide, and now he wanted to walk away from the only family he had left. "We'll come with you," Lucia said, her voice firm, despite the tremor in her chest. "We'll face it together. Whatever it is, whatever you need to do, we're not leaving you. We're your family." Mr. Antony looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then slowly, he nodded. "All right," he said quietly. "We'll do this together." But promise me, Lucia, promise me you'll never give up on this life. This house, this family, it's everything we have now. We'll fight for it, no matter what." Lucia nodded, tears finally spilling down her face. "I promise. We'll fight. We'll always fight." That night, the three of them sat together, quietly eating their dinner. The air was thick with unspoken words, but there was a new resolve in the room. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. They had come too far, built too much, to let anything tear them apart. As the last rays of the sun disappeared behind the horizon, Lucia knew that their journey was far from over, but they had each other, and together, there was nothing they couldn't face. The morning after Mr. Antonia's confession was quiet, but it was the kind of silence that carried the weight of everything left unsaid. Lucia woke early, the sound of the birds. Outside, a faint backdrop to the heavy thoughts clouding her mind. Mr. Antonia's decision to confront his past, to face the people who had once held power over him, had shaken her deeply. She knew he felt the burden of his actions, the weight of the mistakes he had made, but the thought of him walking away, even momentarily, from the family they had become, it was almost too much for her to bear. Yet, as the day stretched on, she realized something important. She couldn't stop it. Mr. Antonio was right. In a way, this was something he had to do, but she also knew that she couldn't let him go through it alone. Their bond, the quiet strength they had built together in this house, had to mean something, and she would do whatever it took to help him, to make sure he didn't lose himself in the process. By noon, she found herself walking outside, her heart restless as her feet carried her to the small patch of garden she had been working on for the past few weeks. Gabriel had been busy inside, helping with repairs, while Mr. Antonio had gone to make arrangements for the sale of the land. But Lucia felt this strange pull, a need to prepare herself for what lay ahead. The garden, though small, had become a symbol of their new life. The plants were growing stronger with every passing day, just as they were. It was in the quiet moments like this, tending to the flowers and vegetables, that Lucia found some peace, though fleeting. Suddenly, she heard footsteps behind her. Turning around, she saw Gabriel standing at the gate, his face unreadable. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice steady but filled with concern. Lucia gave him a small smile, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Just thinking about what comes next." Gabriel nodded, taking a few steps forward. He was still the same quiet boy she had met not long ago, but he had changed. She could see it in his posture, in the way he carried himself now. He wasn't the boy who had wandered alone on the streets anymore. He was someone who belonged. "We're in this together," Gabriel said, as if reading her thoughts. "We don't have to face it alone." Lucia looked at him, her heart swelling with gratitude. Despite all they had been through, the both of them had learned what it meant to rely on others, to trust again. "Thank you, Gabriel. I'm glad you're here." He nodded, his expression softening. "Me too." As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the garden, Lucia felt a surge of determination. She wasn't going to sit idly by while Mr. Antonio faced his past alone. Whatever came next, she would stand by his side. Together, they would confront whatever demons lingered in the shadows. Later that evening, Mr. Antonio returned to the house, his face more worn than when he had left. He didn't say much as he entered, but the look in his eyes told Lucia everything she needed to know. There was something he was holding back, something he hadn't shared yet. "I've made arrangements," he said, quietly, after a long pause. "The land is almost sold, but there's something else. Something more that I need to take care of before it's all over." Lucia's heart skipped a beat. She stepped forward, her eyes filled with concern. "What do you mean?" "I have to go to the people I owe," Mr. Antonio said, his voice heavy with regret. "There are still creditors, people from my past who want their share. I can't avoid them any longer. I need to make things right." Lucia's chest tightened. "We'll go with you," she said quickly, the words coming out before she could stop. "We'll face them together. You don't have to do this on your own." Mr. Antonio shook his head slowly, a faint smile on his lips. "Lucia, I've been running from this for years. I thought if I stayed hidden, if I built a new life, the past would go away. But it doesn't work that way. This is something I have to face, even if it means I lose everything. I can't drag you into this. Not now, not after everything you've done for me." The words were a blow to Lucia's heart. She had been prepared to stand by him, to face whatever came next. But he was right. This was something he had to do for himself. Still, she couldn't shake the fear that gripped her chest. What if it wasn't enough? What if the past was too powerful, too unforgiving? Mr. Antônio, she said softly, whatever happens, you'll always be a family. I don't care about what the world thinks. I care about you. You don't have to face this on your own. He looked at her, his eyes filled with something she couldn't quite place. Gratitude, relief. Thank you, Lucia, he said quietly. But this is something I have to do alone. I promise you, I'll come back. I won't let this destroy us. With that, he turned and left the house, disappearing into the fading light of the evening. Lucia stood there, her heart heavy with the weight of what was to come. She wanted to follow him, to make sure he didn't face whatever was ahead alone, but she knew this was something he had to do by himself. Later that night, after the house had settled into its quiet routine, Lucia sat by the window, looking out into the darkness. The street was calm, the only sound the faint rustle of the wind through the trees. But within her, the storm raged. She didn't know what would happen when Mr. Antônio faced his past. She didn't know if he would come back with his burdens lifted or if he would return more broken than before. But one thing was certain, no matter what, she would be waiting for him. They would face whatever the future held together. And as the stars above the city twinkled softly in the night sky, Lucia closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. They had already survived so much, and now they would survive this too. The next few days felt like an eternity. Lucia found herself endlessly waiting, her mind torn between the uncertainty of Mr. Antônio's journey and the constant need to keep their lives moving forward. She continued her work in the garden, hoping that the small routine she had built would help her keep the anxiety at bay. Gabriel, though more withdrawn than usual, continued his own tasks, quietly repairing the small things around the house. He worked with a focus that seemed to say he understood the weight of the moment more than anyone could express. As the days went by, the house felt emptier without Mr. Antônio's presence. The silence grew louder, and though Lucia kept herself busy, there was a gnawing feeling deep in her chest, a feeling that something was slipping away, just beyond her reach. She knew Mr. Antônio was doing what he needed to do, but that didn't make the waiting any easier. On the fourth day, as the sun dipped low in the sky, there was a knock at the door. Lucia's heart leapt into her throat. She hurried to the door, half expecting to see Mr. Antônio standing there. But when she opened it, she found a man she had never seen before, tall, dressed in a well-fitted suit, his face stern, his eyes calculating. "Are you Lucia?" he asked, his voice clipped and professional. Lucia nodded slowly, trying to read his expression. "Yes, I am. Who are you?" "I'm Alejandro Barbosa," the man replied, his voice low. "I'm here on behalf of Mr. Antônio." Her stomach sank. The man's cold tone didn't give her any sense of reassurance. "What do you want with him?" she asked, her voice trembling despite herself. "I'm afraid there's been a development," Alejandro said, stepping forward without invitation. Mr. Antônio didn't just owe money to creditors. He had a number of personal contacts who believed they were entitled to more than the land. It appears they've decided to take legal action. Lucia felt her breath catch in her chest. "What does that mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "It means the debt isn't settled, and it may be far worse than just losing a piece of property," Alejandro continued, his eyes sharp as he looked around the house. "Mr. Antônio has bigger stakes in this than he's let on." Lucia's mind was spinning. "Bigger stakes? What are you saying? What did he do?" "I'm not entirely sure of the specifics, but I've been instructed to tell you that Mr. Antônio will need to make an appearance at the court in the coming week. There are unresolved matters that can't be cleared without his presence." Lucia's hands clenched into fists at her sides. "But he's not here. He went to handle everything himself. He didn't want us involved." "I know," Alejandro said, "and that's part of the problem. The people he owes don't care about the personal aspects. They want their money, or else they'll take more drastic measures. I'm afraid Mr. Antônio may not have the power he thinks he has to fix this on his own." Lucia's mind raced. The thought of Mr. Antônio in court, facing people who could take everything from them, everything they had worked so hard to build, it was too much. She had to act. She took a step forward, her resolve hardening. "What can we do?" she asked, her voice strong now. "Where is he? How do we find him?" Alejandro's eyes softened just for a moment. "He's in the city. I can't tell you exactly where, but I can offer you something. If you want to help him, you need to come to the courthouse. You need to be there when the case is heard. Maybe together, you can convince them to settle things amicably." Lucia's heart pounded. She couldn't sit by and wait anymore. The past had come crashing into their present, threatening to destroy everything they had fought for. But she wasn't about to let that happen. She turned to Gabriel, who had quietly entered the room, sensing the tension. "We're going to find him," she said, her voice firm. "We're going to help him." Gabriel didn't say anything at first. He just nodded, his face serious. He had learned, just as she had, that they couldn't afford to wait anymore. Whatever was happening, they had to face it head on. The journey to the courthouse was long, the streets filled with a sense of urgency that Lucia hadn't felt before. As they walked together, she kept her focus straight ahead, pushing away the thoughts of fear and uncertainty that crowded her mind. They would find Mr. Antônio. They would stand by him, no matter what. When they reached the courthouse, the cold, imposing building felt like the very embodiment of everything that had come between them and the future they wanted. Lucia's hands trembled, but she held her head high as she walked inside. The air inside the building was stale, and the corridors were lined with cold stone walls. The oppressive atmosphere made her feel small, but she pushed forward, determined to find a way to help. Alejandro led them to a large room where several people were already waiting, businessmen in suits, their eyes scanning through papers, a few in heated discussions. And at the far end of the room, standing in front of a judge, was Mr. Antônio. His face was weary, older than it had been when he left, and his posture was slumped, as if the weight of everything was finally catching up with him. Lucia's heart clenched. She had to act now. She couldn't lose him again. She stepped forward, her voice clear despite the pounding in her chest. "Mr. Antônio," she called, her eyes locking with his. His head snapped up, surprise flickering in his eyes when he saw her. Then, slowly, a faint smile appeared on his lips. "Lucia," he said softly, but the weariness in his voice was unmistakable. "You shouldn't have come." But Lucia wasn't listening. She stepped up to him, standing by his side, her resolve firm. "We're not letting you do this alone," she said. "We're here, and we're going to fight for what's ours." The room fell silent, the tension thick. But Lucia didn't care. She looked at the judge, who was watching her closely. "We've built a life here," Lucia continued, her voice unwavering. "A life we fought for, and we're not going to let it be torn apart." The judge remained silent for a long moment before turning to the group of creditors. "I believe we need to reconsider our options," he said, his voice stern. Lucia's heart raced, but in that moment, she felt the strength of her words settle in. They had come here for Mr. Antônio, for the future they had all worked so hard to build, and they weren't going to let it slip away now. The tension in the courtroom was palpable. Lucia stood beside Mr. Antônio, her heart pounding in her chest, but the determination in her eyes was unwavering. Gabriel stood close behind them, his young face filled with quiet strength. The creditors, a group of men in dark suits, exchanged glances, clearly surprised by their presence. They had expected Mr. Antônio to be alone, vulnerable, but now, with Lucia and Gabriel standing beside him, something had shifted. The judge's stern gaze swept over the room before he spoke again. "It seems we've entered a different stage of this case. You're both," he paused, glancing between Lucia and Mr. Antônio, "here to argue against the claims made by these individuals." Lucia nodded firmly. "We're here to show that Mr. Antônio has done everything he can. He's been honest. He's tried to make amends. He's been rebuilding his life, and we're not here to let it be destroyed by a past he's already paid for." The room fell silent. Even the creditors seemed taken aback by her boldness. The judge looked at the papers in front of him, tapping his pen on the desk, his eyes flicking back and forth between the documents, and the people standing in front of him. "Mr. Barbosa, is this your position as well?" the judge asked, turning to the attorney for the creditors. Alejandro nodded, but didn't speak. It was clear from his tight-lipped expression that he didn't want to be caught in the middle of this sudden change in the courtroom dynamic. He had expected an easy settlement, but Lucia's words had shaken him. Lucia, sensing her moment, stepped forward slightly. "We're not asking for handouts. We're not asking for forgiveness for things that cannot be undone, but we are asking for a chance to rebuild, to honor the promises we've made to each other and to this community. Mr. Antônio isn't a man looking to escape his responsibilities. He's a man who is ready to face what he owes, but we can't do it if we're stripped of everything we've worked so hard to build." There was a slight shift in the room. Even the creditors seemed unsure now, exchanging murmurs. The strength of Lucia's words had found a place in the room, and for the first time, it felt like there was something worth fighting for, something more than money, something intangible but necessary. The judge cleared his throat, his gaze never leaving the papers in front of it. "I will allow some time for further deliberation," he said, sounding almost as if he were trying to hold on to control of the situation. "But we will reconvene shortly." With that, the judge motioned for the creditors to leave the room for a brief break. As they filed out, Lucia and Mr. Antônio stood there in silence, the weight of what had just happened settling over them. Lucia turned to look at Mr. Antônio, her heart in her throat. "We're not giving up on this, right?" His face was unreadable for a moment, but then he gave her a small, tired smile. "We're not giving up, not with you by my side." They stood there for a while, just letting the moment hang in the air. Gabriel walked over to them, standing beside Lucia with an air of quiet confidence. Though he had said little, his presence was grounding. "We're in this together," Gabriel said, his voice steady. Lucia nodded, grateful for the strength in both of them. They had made it this far. No matter what came next, they would face it together. When the creditors returned, the room felt different. The weight of their presence was still heavy, but there was something else now, a sense of uncertainty, even among the most hardened of them. Lucia stood a little taller, her chin lifted in defiance, as if to say they weren't leaving here without a chance. The judge addressed the room once more. "After reviewing the case and considering the recent developments, I propose a temporary settlement." Lucia felt her heart race, but she stood her ground, her eyes never leaving the judge. "Mr. Antônio will pay a portion of the outstanding debts through the sale of his remaining assets," the judge continued. "But in return, I propose that the family is allowed to keep the house for the time being. The rest of the payments will be scheduled, with a reasonable timeline given for Mr. Antônio to meet his obligations." The creditors murmured, clearly not pleased with the compromise, but they said nothing as the judge continued. "This decision is not final, but it does offer a pathway forward," the judge concluded, his voice carrying authority. "Both sides will need to abide by the terms laid out. We will revisit this in 3 months to ensure compliance." Lucia exhaled a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. She glanced at Mr. Antônio, who looked both relieved and deeply worn. "Thank you," he said to the judge, his voice thick with emotion. This means more than you'll ever know." The creditors didn't seem satisfied, but they knew they had little choice but to accept the judge's decision. With one final glance at the family, they filed out of the room, leaving behind only a few murmurs of discontent. Outside the courthouse, the weight of the world felt lighter. Lucia stood with Mr. Antônio and Gabriel, the three of them walking away from the building as the sun began to set, casting long shadows on the street. "We did it," Lucia said, her voice barely above a whisper, as though she were still unsure it was real. "We did," Mr. Antônio replied, his tone thick with emotion. "We couldn't have done it without you, Lucia. Without both of you." Gabriel smiled softly, the first real smile Lucia had seen from him in days. "We're family," he said, his voice quiet but strong. Lucia nodded, feeling a warmth in her chest. For the first time in a long time, it didn't matter what the future held. They had fought together, they had won together, and they would continue to do so. As they walked home, the weight of the past no longer felt quite as heavy. They had made it through the storm, and though the future was uncertain, one thing was clear: they were ready to face it together. The days after the courthouse felt like a dream, surreal, and still heavy with the weight of everything they had fought for. The settlement, though far from ideal, had given them a lifeline, a chance to hold on to their home for a little longer. Mr. Antônio was still burdened with the weight of his past, but there was a new determination in his eyes now. The future, for the first time in years, felt within reach. Lucia woke early the next morning, feeling the warmth of the sun streaming through the window. She walked through the house quietly, taking in the small improvements they had made. The walls, freshly painted, still held the memory of their struggle, but now they reflected something else: hope. The garden, too, had flourished, a symbol of the new life they were cultivating together. The house wasn't just a shelter anymore. It had become their home, a home they had fought for, a home they would protect at all costs. She found Mr. Antônio sitting by the window, looking out at the yard. His posture was still weary, his eyes tired, but there was a peace about him now that hadn't been there before. "I think we've finally earned a moment of peace," she said, her voice soft but full of hope. He turned to her, his tired eyes meeting hers, and smiled. "I never thought I'd see this day, but here we are." Lucia sat beside him, feeling the quiet calm settle over them. The future was still uncertain. There was still work to be done, debts to pay, and challenges to face. But for now, they had won. They had secured their place, and that was enough. The following weeks were filled with small victories and setbacks. Mr. Antônio worked tirelessly to pay off his remaining debts, meeting with creditors and doing what he could to settle his past. The weight of the court's ruling hung over him, but with each payment made, the burden seemed to lighten just a little more. Lucia and Gabriel kept the house running, repairing what they could, tending to the garden, and slowly but surely turning the house into a place that felt truly like home. One afternoon, as they were working in the garden, Gabriel paused, his hands resting on the hoe. He looked out at the house, his gaze lingering on the small patches of flowers they had planted together. "I think we're finally doing it," he said quietly, almost to himself. "We're really building something here." Lucia smiled, wiping her brow. "We are." One step at a time, Mr. Antônio, who had been sitting nearby, stood up and walked over to them. He was more tired than usual, but there was a new light in his eyes. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice rough but filled with resolve. "I want to do something for this community, something that shows what we've been through and how far we've come." Lucia and Gabriel turned to him, curiosity in their eyes. "What do you mean?" Lucia asked. "I've been making arrangements," Mr. Antônio said, his voice steady. "I want to use the money from the sale of the land to start something for the people who helped me along the way, the ones who didn't turn their backs when I was at my lowest." Lucia's heart swelled. "What kind of something?" "A community center," he said, a determined smile on his face. "A place where people can find help, support, and a chance to rebuild their own lives, just like we did." Gabriel nodded, his face lighting up with excitement. "That's a great idea. A place where people can go, just like we had a place to go." Mr. Antônio's eyes softened as he looked at them both. "I never thought I'd be in a position to help anyone. I thought I'd spend the rest of my days paying for my mistakes. But I see now that this house, this family, this life, it's worth something. And I want to give back." Lucia felt tears well in her eyes. They had fought so hard for their place in the world, and now they had a chance to share that strength with others. She knew that it wouldn't be easy, that there would still be struggles ahead, but in this moment, everything felt possible. "That sounds like the perfect thing to do," she said, her voice full of emotion. Mr. Antônio nodded. "We've been given so much. It's time to give back." As the weeks turned into months, the small family worked together, building not just a home, but a future. The community center began to take shape slowly, but surely, as the money from the sale of the land was put to use. People in the neighborhood who had once barely noticed their existence now offered help and support. Word of the family's determination spread, and the once forgotten part of the city began to buzz with a sense of renewal. And then, one warm evening, as the sun dipped low behind the house, Lucia, Mr. Antônio, and Gabriel sat together on the porch, watching the world go by. The house was alive with the sounds of laughter and chatter. Their neighbors, once strangers, had become part of their extended family. The community center, now nearly complete, stood as a testament to everything they had overcome. Mr. Antônio looked at Lucia and Gabriel, his heart full. "I never thought it would come to this," Hope you enjoyed the story. Comment where you're watching from, leave a like, and subscribe to the channel.